Hey there YouTube, I'm Bubbins, and in this Final Fantasy XIV Beginner's Guide, I'm going to be covering the Dragoon class, including some pros and cons of playing the class, and basically talk about how Dragoon functions and all of the basics that you need to know. Dragoon is one of the two melee DPS classes that you can choose from the beginning of Final Fantasy XIV. Whereas the Pugilist focuses on hand-to-hand combat, the Lancer, which turns into Dragoon, is all about lances, unsurprisingly. It's a combo-heavy class, meaning abilities often have to be activated in a specific order as you move from one to the next. As you get higher in levels, you start weaving in more buffs, more jumps, and other combos that add on to the original three. Despite what the character creation screen says, the starting stats of the various races don't really make a difference at all, so feel free to play whichever you like. One of the main draws of playing the Dragoon, especially early on in the game, is the role quests behind it. After level 35, you'll head to Kurthus and meet a man named Alberic who will take up your training as a newly minted Dragoon. You swap from Lancer to Dragoon at level 30. Without spoilers, you're introduced to a very important character and some really important lore that leads directly up to Heavensward that you would otherwise miss. I just happened to pick Dragoon as my starting class, but I honestly couldn't imagine experiencing the story any other way. The basic combo of Dragoon is the True Thrust, Vorpal Thrust, Full Thrust combo. These are activated in order and do most of your damage until Heavensward and beyond. The class also has buffs like Life Surge, which ensures a critical hit for the next ability you use, Lance Charge, which increases all damage dealt by 10% for 20 seconds, and Disembowel, which deals damage but also buffs damage dealt by 10% for 30 seconds. That is genuinely most of the first 50 levels for Dragoon. At level 45 and 50, you get your first jumps in Spine Shatter Dive and Dragonfire Dive, which is where the Dragoon finally starts to feel like a real class. It's worth noting that Doom Spike is the class's first AoE ability, at level 45. Until then, you are exclusively a single target DPS. It's a very straightforward ability that deals 110 damage potency to enemies in a straight line, and is essentially a precursor to Geiskergul, which becomes a core part of the class's identity later on. Your other abilities early in the game aren't that important. You can use Piercing Talon for a ranged attack if you want, but it certainly isn't part of your core rotation. Jump is free damage you can use on cooldown, though you should note that due to a recent change, at no point are you actually up close to the boss. You can jump into an AoE while it's going off, and the entire time you're actually where you activated the ability. Elusive Jump can be an okay way to get out of trouble, but as a whole, you're free to ignore it if you like. Abilities from the expansion content get complicated fast and are beyond the scope of this video, but hopefully this intro should help you get started. Dragoon gets access to 6 role abilities. Second Wind, which can restore 500 potency of health every 2 minutes, Leg Sweep, which can stun targets for 3 seconds, and Bloodbath, which converts a portion of whatever physical damage you do to HP for 20 seconds on a 90-second cooldown. If you're playing by yourself, Second Wind and Bloodbath can be super helpful, especially when you're learning, so definitely put them on your hotbar for emergencies. Feint fulfills a similar role, lowering your target's physical damage by 10% and its magical damage by 5% for 10 seconds on a 90-second cooldown. It's less useful than the others, but helps nonetheless. Leg Sweep is even less important and is something you'll never really use in a serious setting. Arm's Length, on the other hand, is something you should familiarize yourself with. You probably won't need it too much during A Realm Reborn, but in more difficult content, nullifying all knockbacks for 6 seconds can easily be the difference between being fine and finding yourself launched off of a cliff. True North simply turns off directionals for 10 seconds on a 45-second cooldown with a maximum of 2 charges. If you really hate directionals, feel free to use it, but I've always ignored this one. When you first start, you should be working your way towards the most basic combo, which is True Thrust into Disembowel into Lance Charge whenever that is up, and then into the basic combo of True Thrust, Vorpal Thrust, Life Surge when that is up, and Full Thrust. Then you repeat True, Vorpal, Full until the buffs wear off. At 50 you get to add Chaos Thrust after Disembowel, and when you have Spine Shatter Dive and Dragonfire Dive, you generally want to be using those on cooldown when you aren't in the middle of your combo. Again, if you're by yourself or think you're going to die, use Second Wind, Bloodbath, and Feint as needed. One of the things that draws me to specific classes are the armor sets behind it, but Final Fantasy really doesn't show that to you before you start. Dragoons can wear any maiming set in the game, but it also has some role-exclusive armor sets like the ones I'm showing here. Hopefully, they help you decide whether this is a class you want to pursue. For some final tips, one thing Dragoons have to be very aware of is positionals. You don't have to worry about it at the start, but once you hit 50, Chaos Thrust does more damage when executed from the rear. Later on, abilities like Fang and Claw are better when you're flanking. Wheeling Thrust and Chaotic Spring are better from the rear. You will do a lot of bouncing back and forth between the two, so get used to that. The one exception, of course, is when Dragon Sight is active. Though you won't unlock that till level 66, a lot of people seem to forget that it turns off positionals for 20 seconds, letting you stand wherever you want. And keep in mind that if an enemy has a solid circle around them, that means that positionals do not matter. Only when the rear quadrant is open do you have to worry about your positioning when activating abilities. Note that I said activating abilities because the second you press that button is when the damage is done, not when the animation finishes. Feel free to hit it and then move to wherever you need to be while the animation plays. If you want a class that varies a lot, Dragoon may not be for you. Every additional ability is basically another in a long chain of actions you want to execute in the same order with very little variance. About the only thing that changes is when you're using your jumps, but even then, those should just be activated as soon as they come up. While Dragon Sight isn't really explained in this video, and not unlocked until later on, remember to come back and look at this buff priority graphic from the balance. Depending on your party composition, you'll need to know which class to prioritize. I wanted to slip that in just because it is something that is not well known, and at least you're aware that it exists as you start leveling. So that wraps up this beginner Dragoon guide. I hope it proved to be useful for some of you. If you have any other tips I missed or questions to ask, just leave them in the comments below. I'll do my best to get to all of them, and who knows, you might find something helpful. Please make sure to leave a like or subscribe. As a small channel, it really does help me out a bunch. If you want to support the channel, there's a Patreon linked in the description below, or you can become a member right here on YouTube. For now though, I think that's it. I'll see you next time.